Jai Srila Prabhupada. So today you're told to read from Sri Lilamrita, Prabhupada's pastime, activities. It is actually better to hear about the pure devotees of Krishna than to hear about Krishna. Prabhupada said this once in a lecture. He said, it is better to hear about the Pandavas and these devotees. It's better to hear about them than to hear about Krishna himself. Because their life is all about Krishna, it's all for Krishna. They have no separate interests. So by hearing about them, we can be inspired to serve Krishna. We saw this with Prabhupada. There was never a moment that he wasn't Krishna conscious. In fact, one devotee said to Prabhupada once, said, Prabhupada, I'm usually pretty Krishna conscious. But sometimes I fall into Maya. The Prabhupada said, what nonsense you're talking. You are always in Maya, and sometimes you fall into Krishna consciousness. So that is our position. Sometimes we can think of Krishna, remember him, but mostly we are under the influence of the three modes of material nature. So to hear about someone who is always Krishna conscious, 10%, that is good. So, this is chapter 21 of Lilamrita, and this is entitled Beyond the Lower East Side. As you know, the Lower East Side is in New York, Manhattan. That's where Prabhupada began his movement. It was the lowest place in New York. They call it the Lower East Side, but it was the lowest, most degraded place in America. And that's where he went. He knew it was degraded. On the streets there, in the Lower East Side at that time, it's changed now, but at that time, the only people who were walking the streets were drunkards, drug addicts, prostitutes, like that. In that neighborhood, Prabhupada went. He started, the first temple was opened there on 26 2nd Avenue. But he was unaffected by the surrounding. Advaita Acharya told Mahaprabhu once, wherever you are, that is Vrindavan. Because your mind is always absorbed in Vrindavan. So Prabhupada, as I said before, being always Krishna conscious and absorbed, even on the Lower East Side, which is so degraded, he had a different, he saw it differently. One of my godbrothers told me he was there at that time, and he, realizing Prabhupada's position somewhat, he said, Prabhupada, it's a shame that this is all we could offer you, a little storefront in the Lower East Side. And Prabhupada said, but if you could only see it the way I see it. He was transcendental. So, there's a statement beginning by Brahmananda. Brahmananda was one of the first devotees. He says, we were shocked that he was going to leave. I never thought that Krishna consciousness would go beyond the Lower East Side. What to speak of New York City. I thought that this was it, and that it would stay here eternally. That's how he thought. But Prabhupada was thinking of the whole world. So, Hare Krishna was becoming quite popular. There were regular kirtans in the park. Devotees used to go to one Tompkins Square Park. There is even a tree there that the city designated as the Prabhupada tree, because he used to sit there or stand there and do kirtan and speak to people who would listen. So, There was also newspaper coverage. Agnideva, another devotee, he called it the Hare Krishna explosion. The Lower East Side hippies, this is in the 60s, they considered the chanting of Hare Krishna to be, quote, one of the grooviest things happening. And the Swami's disciples didn't take LSD like the hippies did. But this didn't seem to affect their popularity. The devotees were accepted as angelic people, like angels, carrying on the peaceful chanting to others. And they were offering free food to others, and even a free place for hippies to stay. You could get the most interesting vegetarian food free at their place, because Prabhupada taught them how to cook, how to use the spices. If you went at the right time, you could get prasadam. And in their storefront, on the shelf by the door, there were some books from India. In the clubs, local musicians played the melody that they had picked up from the Swami. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. They had picked up this melody when the Swami was chanting in the park or at the temple. The Lower East Side was actually a neighborhood of artists and musicians, and now it was becoming the neighborhood of the Hare Krishnas. One gentleman named Burton Green said, musicians were being influenced by the Hare Krishna chant. They would also chant, in addition to the Hare Krishna mantra, they would chant Govinda Jaya Jaya, Gopala Jaya Jaya, Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jaya Jaya. This was another mantra that Prabhupada taught. This same man, Burton, Burton Green, he says, I used some of those chants when I was recording music. A lot of musicians reached out for this in different ways. We would explode in a short time and blow off, but then keep the chanting underneath as a basis. A lot of people at that time found that spiritual vibrations, even in the midst of the heavy music which we were doing, they were becoming devotee musicians. Evening kirtans was always big. Brahmananda, who was a big fellow also, Brahmananda was huge. He used to stand by the back door every night and watch the room fill up until there was no place left to sit. There was a lot of interest in the group chanting. Group chanting is called Sankirtan. And that is actually the recommended method for the age of Kali, congregational chanting. This was introduced by Lord Chaitanya himself. But after the kirtan, when people began to talk, then some people would start to leave. It was not uncommon for half of the audience to leave before the talks began. They liked the music, the chanting, but they didn't want to hear the talk. So sometimes people would leave in the middle of the kirtan. What they didn't understand was the talks was also kirtan. We have to have a dynamic understanding of kirtan. Prabhupada himself would tell us that Srimad Bhagavatam is a big kirtan by Sukadeva Goswami. And Prabhupada was writing books up until the end when he left. And he would refer to it as, he says, I am beating on a big madanga. This is called Brihat Madanga. Brihat Madanga was a term given by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Prabhupada's guru. He said the printing press, that is Brihat Madanga, that is a big madanga. He said the regular madangas, you can only hear it so far, maybe one block. But the printing press, the Brihat Madanga, you can hear it all around the world. The books can go everywhere. So this was also kirtan, but at that time these people, they just liked the musical aspect, the instruments. But when we develop a taste for hearing, that reading is also hearing, and we develop a taste for hearing talks about Krishna, then we know we are making spiritual advancement. Talks about Krishna is called Krishna Katha, and any other material talks, that is called Gramya Katha. Mahaprabhu told, which one of the Goswami? Raghunath Das Goswami. Mahaprabhu told him, Gramya Katha na shunibe. Don't listen to gossip or material talks. That will only bring you down. So, as devotees, we have to also try not to engage in Gramya Katha, village talk. Gram means village. He said, she said, they said. Don't get involved in that. But Krishna Katha, that is purifying. One evening, Allen Ginsberg brought Ed Sanders and Tully Kupferberg of the musical group The Fugs to the meeting. Allen Ginsberg was the devotees used to say he was a poet of the gutter. He's a poet, he was very much respected by all the hippies and so on. Beatniks even. Beatniks were before the hippies. But he was attracted, and Prabhupada tried to engage him also. So, this Allen Ginsberg, brought these two musicians to the meeting. The Fugs were a local group that had made a name for themselves, and they specialized in obscene lyrics. So even back then, a rock group, they were known for obscene lyrics, cursing. Amongst the popular songs of the Fogs one of them was called Slum Goddess of the Lower East Side, and Group. And another song was I Can't Get High. This man, Ed Sanders, he had wild red hair and an electric red beard. And he would come and play a guitar during the kirtan. The devotees, of course, were happy to see their prestigious guests. On the night that the Fogs were there, Prabhupada, after the kirtans, Prabhupada would come and speak. So Prabhupada chose to speak on the illusion of sexual pleasure. He said, sex pleasures binds us to this material world, birth after birth. And many times he quoted one verse that he would quote many times in his lectures by Jamunacharya. Jamunacharya was a great devotee. And the meaning of the verse was, since I have become Krishna conscious, whenever I think of sex life with a woman, my face at once turns from it and I spit at it off. After that evening, the Fugs never returned. They didn't like to hear that. But Prabhupada, he didn't put water in his mouth to speak. He told it like it is, as it is. So to speak of sexual pleasure was certainly not a strategic move for one who wanted to create followers amongst the Lower East Side, namely the hippies. But Prabhupada never considered changing his message. In fact, when another devotee named Umapati, I think he used to be here long ago.
Yeah, right? He was here.
Mm-hmm. When Umapati had mentioned that Americans don't like to hear that sex was only for conceiving children, Prabhupada replied, I cannot change the philosophy just to please the Americans. One attorney who used to come to the temple named Steve Goldsmith, one evening, he spoke out at the temple. Prabhupada was there and he says, what about sex? Swamiji? And Prabhupada replied, sex should only be with one's wife. And that is also restricted. Sex is for the propagation of Krishna conscious children. My spiritual master, Lilamrita Saraswati, although he was a sannyasi, he was what is called a Naishtika brahmachari. Means his whole life he never engaged in sex life, his whole life. Prabhupada is telling about him. He says, my spiritual master used to say that to beget Krishna conscious children, he was prepared to have sex 100 times. Of course, that is most difficult in this age. Therefore, he remained a brahmachari his whole life. Then Mr. Goldsmith, the attorney, challenged. He said, but sex is a very strong force. What a man feels for a woman is undeniable. Prabhupada replied, therefore, in every culture, there is the institution of marriage. You can get yourself married and live peacefully with one woman, but the wife should not be used as a machine for sense gratification. Sex should be restricted to once a month and only for the propagation of children. Agnideva, not a devotee, these are the first batch of devotees, all coming from the Lower East Side. Agnideva, who was seated just to the Swami's left, where there was a large dangling symbol, he suddenly spoke out. Agnideva, he said, only once a month? And then with a touch of facetious humor, he added, better to forget the whole thing. If only once a month, might as well forget about it. And Prabhupada replied, yes, that's it. Very good boy. The Swami laughed, and others joined him laughing. He continued, he says, it is best not to even think of it. Best just to chant Hare Krishna. And he held up his hands as if he were chanting. He says, that way we will be saved from so much botheration. Sex is like an itching sensation, that's all. And as when we scratch an itch, it only gets worse. So we should tolerate the itching and ask Krishna to help us. It's not easy because sex is the highest pleasure in the material world, but it is also the greatest bondage. In Bhagavad Gita, one of Prabhupada's purport, he referred to sex life, he gave it a Sanskrit term, Maitunya Agara. Maitunya Agara means the shackles of sex life. It binds us to the material world. But the attorney, Steve Goldsmith, he was shaking his head, hearing these words by Prabhupada. Remember, they had never heard anyone speak like this. Prabhupada looked at him smiling and said, "Is there still a problem?" And Mr. Goldsmith said, "Well, it has been proved to be dangerous to repress the sex desire, to repress the sex drive," he said. There's a theory that we have wars because of this. Because of repressing sex drive. He's saying somebody is giving this as a theory. So that's why we have wars. Prabhupada said, people are eating meat. Prabhupada interrupted him. People are eating meat. And as long as people eat meat, there will always be war. And if a man eats meat, he will be sure to have illicit sex also. Now this attorney, Mr. Steve Goldsmith, he was an influential friend and he was also a supporter of early ISKCON. But still Prabhupada would not change the philosophy of Krishna consciousness to please the Americans. There was a hall on West 55th Street. It's in Manhattan. It was called the Judson Hall. And it cost $200 to rent for one night. Big hall. Another devotee, Rai Rama, thought that it was time for the Swamiji to reach out to some more sophisticated New Yorkers. In other words, he was thinking Prabhupada should not only be preaching to these hippies, maybe you get some more sophisticated people. And since the Judson Hall was near a very famous hall, Carnegie Hall. Carnegie Hall is a big concert hall, and it's very sophisticated. The seats are cushioned. I went there when I first came to New York. I went there for a concert. It's really opulent. So this hall, Judson Hall, was near Carnegie Hall, and sometimes it had interesting concerts and lectures. So Rai Rama thought this would be a good place to start. He told it to the Swami. Swamiji agreed to the idea. And Rai Rama printed, a flyer, which he distributed in the Midtown bookstores. On the night of the event, the devotees paraded through the Midtown Manhattan, in the entertainment areas, beating on a big bass drum. Those big ones. There's a film actually with them going out on Harinam. They didn't have mridangas and kartals, Prabhupada didn't bring any of those with him. I think he just brought a pair of kartals from India. So Brahmananda used to, this drum is like, when you have it it'd be all out there, big round drum. They'd use that for the kirtan. So, on the night of the event, when Prabhupada is supposed to speak at this Judson Hall, they were handing out leaflets, flyers. And then they returned to the Judson Hall for the program. Unfortunately, there were only 7 people who came. The devotees felt terrible. They had misled the Swami, and to print those flyers and everything, they had spent money equivalent of a month's rent. Rent was cheap on the Lower East Side. So Raya Rama told Prabhupada when he came, there was only 7 people in a big hall. And he told Prabhupada, if you like, we can cancel the program. And Prabhupada replied, no, let us chant and speak. So the devotees went up on the stage and chanted with the Swamiji and danced. And then they sat down beside him as he lectured, his voice echoing through the empty hall. Afterwards, the Swamiji called for questions, and one young man who was sitting about 15 rows, empty, 15 rows back, he asked whether he was correct in understanding that the Swami's philosophy was primarily for reforming destitute young people. Because that was the first kind of people that Prabhupada attracted, that came. Destitute means, hippies, druggies, like that. So this boy said, that's my thinking, that your message is only for such people. And Prabhupada said, no. Everyone in this material world is lost and destitute. Prabhupada said, everyone is like that. He didn't think that these people are better than those people. Everyone is lost and destitute. And he said, even the so-called successful people are lost and destitute because everyone has forgotten Krishna. After the program, Swamiji sat in a chair by the exit as the few 7 people in the audience were leaving. One respectable looking couple introduced themselves, and Swamiji sat up very straight with folded palms and smiled at them. Brahmananda's mother also came. And Swamiji was very cordial, respectful towards her. But in general, the devotees were depressed at that small turnout. They kept apologizing. I'm sorry, Swamiji. We invited you here and almost nobody came. But Prabhupada raised his eyebrows and said, no one? You did not see Narad Muni? You know who is Narad Muni? He's a transcendental spaceman. He can travel all over the universe and even into the spiritual world, unchecked. And he makes devotees wherever he goes. Like one of his disciples was Prahlad Maharaj, who was the son of the biggest demon of the time. So Prabhupada says, no one? You didn't see Narad Muni? Because Narad Muni likes to attend kirtans. Prabhupada also expressed this at another time after an evening arti kirtan. He said, Narad Muni was here. He could see, but nobody else could see. Prabhupada said, whenever there is chanting of Hare Krishna, even the demigods come to participate. You know that song we sing for the evening arti? The Gora Arti song? Shiva Shuka Narada, Brahma, in the second verse mentioned, Brahma Agnideva. Brahma is the biggest demigod, chief. They come to the kirtan. They know what is the kirtan. They know it's glorifying their Lord, Krishna, and so they come sometimes. But we can't see them. Meanwhile, back at the temple, Prabhupada chided Rai Rama, like joking with him. Prabhupada said, I told you we should have charged money. But he's joking. Whenever something is free, people think it is worthless. But if you charge, say, $3 or $5, people will think, oh, you are offering something valuable. In Bengal is a state in India, that's where Prabhupada came from. He is Bengali. In Bengal, there's a story of a man, Prabhupada is telling this story. There's a story of a man who went house to house offering people free mangoes. And no one would take his mangoes. They think something's wrong with it. Why is he giving it away for free? They thought, there must be something wrong. Why is he giving away my free mangoes? So the man changed and he began to charge 3 rupees. And then they thought, oh, these look like good mangoes. It's the same mangoes. But because they have to pay for it, they think this is good. And the price is only 3 rupees, they would say. Prabhupada says, so when people see that something is free, they think it is worthless. So better to charge them some money, and they will think it is very nice. Burton Green, we read about him. He came with the members of the Fugs group. He was a musician and he was fond of the Swami. He was fond of banging on a piano during the kirtan. Wow, they even had a piano. Somebody must have brought the piano and put it there at the temple. Burton Green, he comments, he says, we had a really explosive thing to break out of this capitalistic, materialistic egg sitting on us. So there was so much ferocity in the music. We were trying to break out. But spinning out like that, you could have a nervous breakdown. So it was great for us to go to the Swamis and chant in his small storefront on 2nd Avenue. The streets were full of Maya and perversion. You even know this word, Maya. But his place, the Swami's place, was a place to really mellow out. It was great to chant there, to balance my life. It was great to sit and have prasadam with the Swami and get some real, authentic Indian cooking and chapatis. And we would talk about different things. Especially when I had very little money in my pocket. It was always nice to go there. When Burton asked Prabhupada to attend his piano recital at the town hall, Prabhupada agreed to go to this crazy man's piano recital. Brahmananda comments, about 7 or 8 of us devotees, that's all there were at the time. We were about 7 or 8 of us in our sneakers and jeans. That time they didn't even have dhotis. We had ridden on the subway with the Swami to the town hall. So we went in, we took our seats, and the concert began. Burton Green came out, opened the piano top, he took a hammer and began wildly hitting on the strings, when you lift the piano lid, hitting on the strings with a hammer. And this went on for an hour. An hour and a half. He invited Prabhupada to come and hear this. We were all sitting there with the Swami, and we all began to chant on our beads. There were only about 24 people in the whole theater. And then intermission came, a little break. And Swamiji wanted to go to the toilet. So I went along with him, this Brahmananda speaking. I went along and helped him, turning on the water for him in the sink, and getting a paper towel for him. Doing these little services for Swamiji seemed like it was the perfection of my life. He understood something. This is Vaishnavism. Vaishnavism to serve the Vaishnava. Vaishnava means really pure devotee. I remember there was an incident where a few of Prabhupada's disciples went across the Ganges, and they went to one of Prabhupada's godbrothers, Sridhar Maharaj, who was Prabhupada's close friend. He was Prabhupada's friend. In fact, when Prabhupada even said in one talk, the first time I met Sridhar Maharaj, I wanted his association because I knew that he was a pure devotee. Of course, Prabhupada was a pure devotee himself. It takes one to know one. So anyway, some of Prabhupada's sannyasis went over to see Srila Maharaj. And there were specifically two Swamis. One's name was Yashodanandana, and Guru Kripa. So when they went, they sat and listened to him talk. He was a real philosopher. A real philosopher. And after his talk, he invited them, he said, now you can go and take some prasadam. And this is at his temple. But on that day, it happened to be Ekadashi. And Yashodanandan respectfully said, Maharaj, it's been my practice that on Ekadashi days, I fast completely. I don't even take water. And Srila Maharaj looked at him and said, really? And you are jumping so high in the kirtan? He was used to doing that. He played in Madanga, and I'm not kidding, his feet would be off the ground at least this high. He said, you are jumping so high and not taking any prasadam? And then he said, but if it is your desire, if you requested me, then I will take some prasadam. And Srila Maharaj said, he has understood what is Vaishnavism. The Vaishnava asks you, offers you something, you accept it. So, Brahmananda said, doing these little services for Swamiji seemed like the perfection of my life. There was something so great about him that just doing these little things, that was my perfection. And I felt like I was protecting him, like I was his personal bodyguard. Coming up from the subway, I showed him how the subway worked. And I would answer all his questions. It all seemed very intimate, having Prabhupada's association. Anyway, we went back upstairs to our seats, and Burton Green came right up to the Swami again, saying, Swamiji, are you happy? Are you comfortable? Did you like it? Him banging on the strings of the piano with a hammer. Swamiji was very polite and he said, yes. And then Burton said, well, now the second part is coming. Wow. Because there was intermission. They used to do that at the concerts, I remember. Any concert you went to, they would break it up halfway. Because now it's intermission, so then people could go to the bathroom, go and get some refreshments or something. For about half an hour, and then they'll come back and the other half. So he said, now the second part is coming. And Brahmananda said, I interrupted. I tried to tell him that Swamiji is very tired and he takes rest at 10 o'clock. And it was already past 10. So I said, we have to go back. But Burton kept pressing the Swamiji to stay for the second half. And so we had to stay. Then the poets, there were poets came out and began reciting poetry. So we ended up staying there until 11:30. And then we had to ride back in the subway to the temple. However, a few weeks later, I learned that Prabhupada had another reason for going to the town hall. The reason he had was he was thinking of renting it for a temple. See how he is thinking? He wants to use everything in Krishna service. And so he had this idea and he wanted to see the hall. It's 9:15. Is that when we're supposed to stop? So, these are the real early pastimes of Prabhupada. You could say this is like Adi Leela. Things got developed. By the time I joined, I came in 1972. This has all taken place in the 60s, like 60. It probably tells you earlier on. By the time I came, things had progressed and developed to some extent. By then there were a few temples, New York was the first, and San Francisco. Prabhupada was so, open-minded. Devotees would come to him and tell him, Prabhupada, we think that San Francisco is a good place to have a temple. And he would say, okay, do it. He had no money to give them, but they would go and start something. Then he went to Canada, opened a temple there, Boston. And this was one after the other. There was 1 year, I can't remember which year it was, something like 40 temples opened. He was on a roll. Anyone devotee, and these devotees who were opening these temples, they were new devotees. They weren't old devotees. When some of them came, and I told them, England, I said, go. They told them, we hope that when we go to England, we could meet the Beatles, they were the top musical group of the time. And Prabhupada said, Krishna must be giving you some inspiration, so go. And again, he had no money to give them. How do you go to England? They had to find a way. They say, where there's a will, there's a way. And this is how temples were opening. But here, we're reading, it's still just the only temple. And it's just a small little storefront. When they got this temple, the storefront, it was a little shop that used to sell, all kinds of unusual things. And the name of the shop, they had a big sign outside that said, matchless gifts. But the rent was cheap, that they could afford it. And they told when they brought Prabhupada to see the place, they said, "Should we get rid of that sign?" And Prabhupada said, "No, I like that sign." He said, "I have some matchless gifts to give you." And he did. These are the real matchless gifts. His books, temples, everything. They're all matchless. The kirtan, the Mahamantra, the songs of the Vaishnava Acharyas that we sing sometimes, those are all matchless gifts. We just have to appreciate, take advantage of them. Okay, we will stop there. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.